Welcome to The Main Thing. I'm Evan Maindonald, and today I'm interviewing Nicholas Wallwork, the CEO of PropertyForum. Nicholas, can you just introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on. I own and run PropertyForum.com, which is the world's largest international property chat forum and news portal. I'm a developer, I'm an investor. I run a specialist media agency called Whitefinch that's specialist for the investment and real estate markets. And I've just written 2 books this year, so I've been a busy boy, investing in international real estate for dummies, for the For Dummies brand. And they came back and asked me to do Brexit for dummies, which I initially sort of chuckled at, but yeah, Julie wrote an interesting, completely neutral book to help us try and decipher what's going on with Brexit. It's not going to give you the answer, but it'll give you some of the background and history and interesting topics. So,
well, that's a very wide subject.
So
so you're deeply involved in property. What I'm really interested in understanding is how you got started in property.
Yeah, I think I really got started learning. Very mumuch educational based. I'll get onto the practical bit in a minute, but really it was learning, reading every entrepreneur's book going, all the very well-known household names, Richard Branson, Warren Buffett, etc. But lesser known, entrepreneurs and successful people. I wanted to learn the tools and traits of what it takes to become successful.
So at this point, had you decided that you wanted to start a property business and you read those books to get you started in property, or were you still deciding what sort of business you wanted to get into?
Yeah, the latter. I knew property was an asset class.
Yep.
I understood that you need to invest into assets that bring you money in your bank account. They're not liabilities. The whole Rich Dad, Poor Dad philosophy, one of the best books ever written, in my opinion, for financial education, has a real estate slant as well, of course. And I'm sure
don't buy a car, buy a house.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, buy assets, not liabilities. A very basic, fundamental rule that I've known for many years, and that book solidified a lot of the ideas I already had in my head. So when you read stuff that's confirmation of your sort of thinking along the right line, that's great. And every book, every bit of knowledge, hopefully confirms some things you're hopefully doing right and some things you might be doing wrong. Yeah. Practically, I rented out a spare room in my house at the time. It was probably 2003. I think, so around that sort of time, 2002, 2003.
So was that the first property that you'd bought?
That was the first property I bought. Yeah. I came out of university, I took a 15 grand student loan, a 10 grand graduate loan, so 25 grand's worth of debt leaving uni. That's not including the student debt I'd accumulated during university. And that was my deposit. And within, I think, 2 years, I was very fortunate in 2000. It was a buoyant market. Prices were going up. Within 2 or 3 years, I'd refinanced the house, taken out more on the actual main mortgage to bring the finance cost down. I paid back both of those loans. I bought myself a nice little sports car. Great. I thought I'd made it at 23, far from it. But actually, compared to all my mates that were struggling with debt out of uni and they'd, got on the rat race and they were doing a job for X amount a year, they were changing their time for money. Yeah. I'd kind of learned the way. This is my first stepping stone into really understanding the rules of wealth building and success, and specifically property.
Yeah, that's really interesting because there's a couple of things that came out there. Obviously, you got on the property ladder very early. You used a phrase, and I think probably deliberately, trading time for money. And I guess with the implication that the strategy that you'd undertaken was deliberately different from just selling your time for money.
Absolutely.
Essentially what you were looking to do was, rather than do that, put your money into assets that you could then use to build wealth and build more assets.
Choice and freedom as well.
Yeah.
And, balance.
So was that strategy something that had come to you from having read those business books? Had you gained inspiration from other people who started businesses to do that?
Absolutely. I'm not professing I'm reinventing the wheel here. What I'm doing is taking all the best bits of everyone that's gone before me. I've read from all the greats. I've read all the great books. I've taken nuggets of information throughout my career, right from the early days, and I still do today. Yeah. You can never say you've made it. You can never say I know it all. That someone that comes across in that way in an arrogant manner is going to fail pretty soon, in my opinion. I think change is the only constant, and it's definitely about learning some of the fundamental rules of success in this life and this world. And if you can learn those, it makes your life a lot easier. You're not on an uphill battle. You're not doing the 9 to 5. I said the rat race is a phrase that we all are very familiar with. But I think once you know these kind of tricks and rules, they're easy to apply in everyday life. It takes a bit of time for the results to come. This is not, I wouldn't suggest there's any way of getting rich quick. That does happen with company IPOs and whatnot. You can make money very quickly in certain fields, but to plan for that's almost impossible. When people make money quickly, it's usually due to luck or the right time, the right place.
Well, I would say, people, we talk about the concept of an overnight success, but 99% of the time, if not more, those overnight successes are maybe a decade or more in the making. And so, we might see somebody that's made a lot of money on Bitcoin, for example, but they may have been in cryptocurrency for 10 years. So it isn't, I think it's very easy to point at people and say that person has gone from not being worth a lot to being worth a lot very quickly. But it's quite rare that those, and it does very occasionally happen, but I think that's luck more than anything else. But 99.9% of the time, those successes that we see as being overnight successes are actually 10-year overnight successes or 20-year overnight successes.
It's the full foundation, isn't it? It's the foundation of their knowledge, their experience, doing deals and business to prove that you not only got the ideas, you actually done it. That's really valuable in this market. There's lots of people saying they can do things, and great for them for doing something and going out there and trying, but I think it's even more powerful when you've actually proven you can do it, and you're sort of you've got the backup to what you're saying and putting out there as advice to people.
No, exactly, I agree. And it's interesting actually, because one of the things that I say about what I do is that planning and preparation is key, and I think that applies to property development, but it actually also applies to starting a business. And it seems to me that you sat down and did a lot of thinking before you actually jumped in and did anything. Is that?
Yeah, pretty much. I think, like you're talking about this overnight success scenario, that there's that 10 years of build-up where I've done lots of little deals and lots of little bits of business and rented out my spare room to start with, which turned into 2 rooms in that house, converted the garage into an ensuite bedroom. There was 3 bedrooms. Then I moved out, rented the 4th and bought a second property. That was my sort of first deal in the first sort of couple of years. It took me like 2 years to do that deal, Yeah,
exactly. And it takes you a while to build out. So where was that property?
That was in Reading, actually, in Berkshire. Okay. I still own it. I refuse to sell it. I just want to give that one to my kids and say that's the thing, that's the property that started it all.
That's really interesting. And actually, I got started in property in a very similar way. The first property that I bought was in London, in Hammersmith, in about 94. I bought a 4-bed house. I rented out 3 of the bedrooms, and I went from being in a situation where I was paying £500 a month in rent to a situation where I was paying no rent and I had a net income of £1,500. Okay, I had to pay my mortgage. That was about £500 a month, but in essence, I'd put myself in a cash flow positive situation, which gave me lots of options. And actually, at that time, I also had a full-time job, so it was a good position to be in.
It's a very similar story. we almost retired on a very modest salary at that very young age. And I think that power, that confidence, the power of confidence that gives you to go, you know what, I'm as retired, with let's say it's £1,000 net income for your spending money and the odd holiday. That's not dissimilar to someone that has a 40, 50 grand a year job. They maybe have a net salary of £1,000 after paying the bills and the car and the finance and this and that. So actually, that's a very powerful position to be in, and that allows you to be creative. So those very small tricks of passive income and buying an asset that brings you money, puts it in your bank account, you've freed up your time ultimately, and then your time can go into growing the business. It's only a 4-hour work week, as Tim Ferriss puts it in his very successful book, if you are going to sit back and do the 4 hours to keep that ticking over and then, swan around the world and enjoying a millionaire's lifestyle, but without actually having £1 million in the bank.
It's interesting, actually, because not a lot of us actually end up doing that. And I think there is something about human nature, I think, that makes us want to see that things are changing and growing and evolving. And so I guess when we hit one thing that we consider to be a success, we sort of bank it and then we're focused on the next one. So
I disagree that's human nature, by the way. I think that's some people's human nature. I think there's plenty of lazy people out there that
Well, perhaps entrepreneur's nature is...
Entrepreneur's nature is a better way of putting it. Yeah, absolutely. And we're driven and...
It just shows that I surround myself with entrepreneurs.
Well, exactly. You think everyone's like that. I don't think they are.
No, but you're right, they aren't. And I know plenty of people that aren't.
And that's how you can differentiate yourself in the world, isn't it? Is getting out there and being ambitious and driven and information hungry and self-educate yourself. Things are changing constantly. Regulations changing. Rules of money are changing constantly. And I think you've got to stay abreast of all that before you can even run a business, let alone tell someone else how to run a business or how to invest.
And I can see that philosophy is one that you've started with, and actually that it's followed you through to where you are now. But what I'm really interested in, and I think what a lot of people are very interested in, is how entrepreneurs get from one place to another place, because they'll see that you're maybe doing multiple large projects now, and that's a certain amount of scale to your business, or that isn't something that I don't think you just jumped into after doing your first property and deal and finding some success with it. So what happened after that first property that you bought? What did you do next?
Well, so I moved out of that property, rented out the room that I was staying in. Just came up for rent this month, actually. So when I see an advert, pick up for it. Rented it within 2 or 3 days of it coming available, and it brings back all the memories. But I jumped into it and bought another house, and freed up a little bit of equity from the first one to buy the second one. That only works in a buoyant market. So I was lucky in my early career that the market was in a solid upward trajectory, so I could sort of take out a little bit of deposit money for the first couple of deals. Then I bought a flat in London, a couple of flats in London, and then we started doing HMOs. Actually, we were doing HMOs. Well, actually, that first house was an HMO in 2003. It's like 17, 18 years ago now. So, to have been doing them then, mass market sort of caught up with that now. I've been doing this 18 years.
I was here before you. I was doing them in 94.
Okay, fair enough. We could have been housemates, you never know.
Indeed. Yeah.
So I think, and then we sort of went on to gradually bigger deals. And conversions, and realizing that you need to add value. I think what happens is, in a booming market, you get everyone and their, every man or woman and their dog thinking they can go and throw a lick of paint and put new flooring in and make a load of profit. And in a really booming market, that's fine. You can do that, but that's not adding substantial value, and that's not adding any knowledge, any real skill. And the problem with that is that's short-lived. And in a normal market, that doesn't work. So in the slower markets, we turn to developing and adding more value, doing good conversions, and we're experts in Microstudio developments. We moved on from HMOs, understanding how to really sweat the asset and get the most yield from it, whilst providing an excellent service to tenants, high quality professional accommodation that's much needed now at an affordability level, with rents being an all-time high. We're actually creating a really nice sort of Microstudio model where people can get into an affordable level of rent with a quality product, and we're also making good income, which makes the business really work, and we can carry on developing.
So that Microstudio model is about delivering rental accommodation. So you're not necessarily talking about office to residential permitted development conversions, or are you?
No, we are. I mean, we now develop a lot of office to residential conversions. The permitted development rights came in about 3 years ago, I think it was. And those have allowed more lax planning for the conversions of office back to residential. It's quite a well-known strategy. And that adds a lot of value. It takes away some of the risk, which means you can do more deals, provide more accommodation. But the model is about, then you've got to have an exit, you've got to have a plan. It's all very well building something nice and shiny with all these lovely studios, but actually they've either got to sell or you've got to rent them out. And we go for the rental model, so we're creating a sort of mini PRS buildings, anything from sort of 27, 30 units up to 51 units, our current pipeline. Pretty good. Over 100 units of that nature in the Thames Valley region under build this year. So we're not massive scale developers, but we're good, solid medium level. I think it's better to have a few smaller deals than it is one huge deal, especially at the moment. We like to spread our risk. It's really important for us and our investors to protect their investment and their trust in us. So we make sure we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. And the demand is there from the rental side. So it doesn't matter what Brexit's doing. It doesn't matter what, all these kind of different market black swan events are doing around us. Long term, at the moment, rents are strong. We can rent the buildings. We're providing quality accommodation at an affordable price, and that ultimately means you get a good yield for the building. So that's where it is: rentals and yield, and money in your bank with an asset, not money out with a liability. And developing to sell at the moment can be a little bit tricky, depending on where you are.
Yeah, certainly the market for residential properties has had a little bit of a wobble, particularly in London. And I guess if you're taking a long-term approach, that approach of building assets with an income stream is a good one. I want to come back to that, but I'd like to just rewind a little bit, because I think, as I said earlier on, this journey of an entrepreneur is something that I find very interesting, because
it's fascinating, isn't it?
I like to learn from what other people have done, because you see somebody saying, okay, I started this way and I'm now doing this, but it's all of those little steps in between that are interesting. And the reason that they're interesting, I think, is that they're different for every person.
Yeah.
Everyone has a different journey.
Absolutely.
But I think, to me, the key to understanding how to be an entrepreneur and how to be a better entrepreneur, or to be better at business, at what you do, is to learn from the steps that other people have taken. So I want to just take you back to that sort of era up to, say, 2007. There was obviously a fairly momentous event that happened between 2007 and 2012.
Yeah. What was that?
And I'm sure that
just don't say the
global financial crisis.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that had something of an impact on your business. And I just want to explore that as well.
Yeah.
Because I think anyone who's lived through that era will have been a little bit burned by it, but also I think will have learned a lot. And so you mentioned that you went on to buying and refurbishing flats. Did you actually start doing what you would call HMOs in that period up to 2007? I mean, what were you doing in those years up to sort of 2006, 2007? Where had you got to?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I started off, as I said, in buying and doing my own deals. Yeah. So I wasn't building a profile. I wasn't acting for anyone else other than myself and my business. And those first few deals got me thinking, and I saw, a huge issue with our industry, which is one of trust and ethics. And there are some sort of unethical operators in any business, and property, unfortunately, because it's not that tightly regulated, you get a few people kind of taking your money, and developers, Ponzi schemes, all these kind of horrible things that do happen all the time. And I wanted to help investors that were naive or first-time investors or starting out. I wanted to try and create a situation for them where they didn't get burnt. I kept hearing bad stories. Yeah. So we got involved in and bought PropertyForum.com, which we've been running for several years now.
Did you buy that in?
It wasn't actually pre-2008. We bought it after that. So what happened is that business actually struggled after 2008 because there's a lot of defamation going around for developers going bust that had lost people money. It was a really horrible time. Yeah. So the forum stalled, and we came in and picked it up after the credit crunch, so 2 or 3 years later, or a few years later, actually, and then picked it up since then. But the ethos has always been helping people, trying to help people with good, honest, fairly priced advice or free advice. And the Property Forum is all free to join and free advice. It's a public forum and a news portal. So, it's all about being transparent, highly ethical, and I wanted to provide a platform for people to go on and get great information as a starting point. I'm not professing that you can go and learn every property strategy out there. My book does that, but no, it's a case of just giving away good advice for cheap or free.
At some point you have to start learning from experience, obviously, but I think you should arm yourself with as much knowledge as possible. I guess it's the same as getting a degree. You can get a degree in a particular subject area, but it doesn't actually arm you to go and do work in that area. No. It just helps you get there a bit quicker because you've got the knowledge behind you.
Someone's made those mistakes, and it's distilling that advice down to actually don't do these things, they're really bad, avoid this, that and the other, and try these. It doesn't mean you're not going to make a load of mistakes, because you will. That's life. It's about how you overcome those mistakes and make you successful.
And not just the mistakes, but also when things happen in the market that are outside your control. So I want to drag you back again to that 2006, 2007 time.
Finish that question, actually.
Because I think that's, for me, that's really interesting. So when you got, I mean, in 2006, 2007, were you doing HMOs? Were you just investing in single properties?
I've done HMOs, my own deals, and those are actually what kept me alive, to be honest. Kept me surviving because they had the cash flow in, and rents were fine. Rents did really well because what happened is developers stopped developing, finance dried up, so developers couldn't develop. So there's actually over that few year period, and probably 5 or 6 years of the aftermath of 2008, before building really started to get off again, with the undersupply of UK property getting considerably worse in that period. Rents were booming, actually. So
and interest rates obviously came down quite dramatically, which was a huge
cash flow, really good for cash flow. So the small portfolio I built up at that time carried me through. I did have my first agency business, my first and only, well, I have two, but I have one long-standing. The first one started in 2007. In hindsight, it was financial suicide.
We couldn't have known that.
I couldn't have known that. So we did the best business ever. But that was the problem with the market. It was a bubble, and we were selling 20 or 30 flats, in a month, and it was crazy boom times, and I didn't recognize that because I was young in my career. So that business failed, unfortunately, and the aftermath of the next 2 or 3 years I survived by having my own investments. So I really understood the value of an asset, not necessarily just a pure service-based offering, which disappeared in 2008.
Was that a deliberate strategy for you to have built up those assets? In other words, had you looked forward and thought, okay, at some point there's going to be a crash and I need to build something up which will see me through it, or were you just lucky?
I think there's always a bit of both. If I could say I made the right decisions strategically perfectly all the way through my career, I'd be lying, as anyone would. I think you do your best, and certainly understood the fundamentals of putting money in my bank account each month, above paying the mortgage and the bills was a good strategy. And, property should always be a medium to long term strategy, unless you're a developer and the market's okay and you can add the value and then earn the value by doing the development, that's okay. But the more invested style model should be longer term, in my view. So absolutely, I knew that property was a good investment. Absolutely, I bought the right properties that made sure I got a good amount of cash flow each month and passive income. And so, yes, I had that as a plan. I didn't realize quite how important it would be, having had the agency business go wrong and had to shut that down. In hindsight, I look back and go, thank goodness I sort of done that side of my business. And now I build, and keep a lot of stuff that we build. We probably only sell 20 or 30% of what we build just to recapitalize the business and keep doing more deals. But ultimately, we have a very strong portfolio of 20 odd million of rental PRS style investments that we rent out on a long-term basis to tenants and young professionals to make sure that we can ride future storms of cash flow, and that the cash flow is king, cash is king. So I learned a tough lesson then, survived it and just about, and I've applied that to the future. So touch wood.
That's really interesting too, because I think there's a lot in common between your approach, or the approach that you've taken and your philosophy, and the approach that I took to studying my business. From the outset, I always viewed my business as being not just property development, but property development and investment. So led by the property development activity, I always knew that was going to be the more significant in terms of amount of turnover. But I had a philosophy of selling properties that didn't give me a good rental return and keeping ones that did, and generally that tended to mean keeping flats and selling houses. And so what I found is that actually it was a lot easier to refinance stuff and keep it at the end than sell it, because when you sell stuff, people want service, and actually dealing with customers, it's an overhead. It's something that you need to have the bandwidth to do, which means either employing people to do it or just putting processes in place to do it. So actually, it's much easier to refinance a development at the end of it and put it into a rental property portfolio. And so deliberately, alongside the property development business, we built up an investment property portfolio, and I had seen that as something of a hedge against the next recession.
Yeah.
The thing that I hadn't predicted, and I suspect you will say the same thing, is I had thought that actually the risk was that interest rates would go up, because they had in the previous recession. So in the recession in the late 80s, what happens is that interest rates shot up because we were trying to get out of the European exchange rate mechanism, trying to stay in the European exchange rate mechanism, and so the interest rates were pushed artificially high. And so my concern is that would precipitate a crash, but in fact the opposite happened. And so in fact the strategy ended up working out a lot better than I had thought it would. I was most concerned about leverage, and in fact it proved to be that actually having a reasonable level of leverage was quite a good thing, because interest rates came down so dramatically. Yeah. And so I suspect probably that same thing that carried me through the global financial crisis is probably very similar to what carried you through, is that existing portfolio, and you just kind of sat there and rode out the storm.
Definitely rode out the storm, waited for sort of end values to recover, and then sell when the times are right. If, you've got to be able to afford to hold on to stuff. Yeah, that's pretty critical to keeping going. I think it's always important to keep growing, keep building, growing both in terms of personally. I mean, a lot of my ethos actually comes from mindset. In the real estate book, Investing in International Real Estate for Dummies. If you haven't heard of it yet.
I think I may have heard of it. Haven't read it yet, but I will soon.
There's a whole chapter on mindset. So for me, mindset is critical to any business or life success. Yeah. It's learning the basic rules of how your mind works. I mean, we're all the same people. We all have a similar body, and barring extreme athletes that potentially are physically better off than others, we all have a brain. Yeah, it's how we train that through education and knowledge and learning and tools and techniques. This stuff can be taught, and that's what's cool about it. I like learning new stuff, and I like applying that, and I want to share that with others. Yeah. So it's a fascinating thing, the mind, and it's vastly underused, isn't it?
I agree, and I think there's nothing as powerful as being able to get yourself to a place where you have so many options that you actually don't really care whether a thing happens or not. Yeah. And the weird thing about it is that I don't know if you find the same thing, that if I'm in that place and I've got I've got so many things I could be doing that are all really interesting, that I don't really care whether one thing or happens or not. It actually makes it more likely that things will happen, strangely, because you're less emotionally tied to a thing, less. Actually, I'm not sure I even know how to explain why that is the case. I just know that it is the case.
Well, you are describing to a T the law of attraction. If you're putting a sort of negative feeling of like this one egg in this basket over here might fail, probably will. If you're actually focused on all this great opportunity, these opportunities will come to you themselves naturally, and you're not focusing on the failure, you're focusing on the success, which is the best one, which is the most successful thing I can do right now. That's going to make me and the other person, everything should be win-win in business. You're going to make what's the best deal for everyone. If you focus on the best and abundance, then it's going to come to you. That's quite a critical mindset.
It is, but the thing is, I understand that is the case, but I struggle to completely rationalize why it's the case. And I think it must be because when you're in a discussion or a negotiation with somebody else, they sense where you're coming from. Whether the words are spoken or unspoken. Yeah. When we talk to one another, I think we must have some insight into how that other person's mind is functioning. Perhaps we give it away by the things we say. I don't know, but I can tell you that if I go into a negotiation and I genuinely don't care what the outcome is, I'm more likely to get what I want.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's, like you say, call it a vibe, call it a feeling. If you're putting out positive energy, positive vibes, positive attitude, and being positive is a massive part of my success, and remaining positive even in the trickiest, darkest days. Yeah. Coming out, getting out of bed, doing the day's work harder than anyone else, 10 times harder than anyone else. The opportunities come to you, but you've got to be positive. You've got to look, plan for the worst, but
I agree.
Assume the best.
It's about, for me, not getting on an emotional roller coaster. So when something bad happens, maybe an email comes and something that you didn't want to happens, you look at it and say, okay, I'll just move on. Mm-hmm. When something good happens, it's almost the same. Okay, great. Let's just move on. And I think if you can enable yourself to be almost emotionally flat in that way about your business, you become more rational. And I think business, actually, if you boil it down, it's about logic, and it's about taking the emotion out of it and getting yourself to a place where actually what you're doing is a series of steps that are
proven
and thought through. Yeah. And actually based on, I think where we started this conversation as well, I think there's great value in learning from what other people have done. Why reinvent the wheel? Why not take the best of everyone's experience? And then, I think I'm a great believer in plagiarism. But plagiarise it and do it your own way. Put your own spin on it.
Plagiarise the fundamental concepts, but do your own spin on things, and then add extra ideas on top. It's about an ingredient. I believe every human being is an ingredient of everything that they've learned or been in the past, whether it's childhood, whether it's a positive, negative, indifferent childhood, various educational streams. It's been proven there's many very highly successful billionaires that have come from nothing to rags to riches stories. And likewise, just because you've had a private school education and gone the whole route through Oxford or Cambridge, it doesn't mean you're going to make it. I
think if you've had that, maybe not the easiest upbringing, it makes you more scrappy, makes you more likely to succeed. I believe it does.
Yeah, and you learn how to negotiate maybe.
Yeah.
One of the great things I attribute my father for was being a real wheeler dealer is the wrong word, but he'd be the guy that would see something when we're taking the stuff down the tip, and he'd want the old TV over there. And I'd see him negotiating with the guys on the tip. I mean, I'm not afraid to tell you that and tell everyone that, because
that's
learning how to get on anyone's level, build rapport with everyone from that kind of working class scenario right up to top fund managers and everyone in between. It's about negotiating with people and learning on the street almost, and learning that sort of grassroots wheeling and dealing and how to see an opportunity that works for everyone,
Yeah, exactly. And I think inside every really successful entrepreneur, at some point, they've learned how to stick deals together and how to wheel and deal in that way, but also to form relationships which rise above that. I think those are two ingredients which I think are really important.
Yeah.
Nicholas, it's been a real pleasure talking with you
Likewise.
today.
Two very similar
running out of time,
minds.
so we need to wrap this up. But I've found this conversation really interesting, fascinating, in fact.
Me too.
Thank you for coming in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.